At my company's 25th anniversary gala, my son poured a glass of red wine over my head, then looked me in the eye and said, "People who don't know their place don't deserve to stand beside successful people." My daughter-in-law burst into laughter. "At least now you look like a real server," she sneered. Neither of them realized the wine-soaked envelope inside my jacket held something that could change both of their lives forever. Thank you for being here with me. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever felt invisible to someone who should have known better, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling. What matters most is the message this carries. The envelope in my jacket pocket was soaked with red wine by the time the board opened it. But that night before the wine, before my son raised that glass in front of 250 people, it was still clean, still full of promise. And I had no idea my own blood would be the one to destroy it. I sat alone in my car, in the Palmer House parking lot, engine off, November, cold, seeping through the windows. At 68, I had built Hoffman Infrastructure Group from a two-man crew into a billion-dollar enterprise. And tonight, I was preparing to give 40% of it to the son who no longer wanted me in the room. I just didn't know that yet. The envelope rested against my chest, tucked inside the navy blazer Opal bought me in 2003. She'd been gone 6 years, but I still wore that jacket to important meetings. She used to say a real man doesn't need clothes to speak for him. I ran my thumb over the envelope's edge, legal documents inside drafted 3 days ago and waiting only for my signature. 40% ownership transfer. $640 million. The greatest inheritance a father could hand to his son, wrapped in a plain manila envelope, because Opal taught me that real wealth doesn't need gold paper. 82% stayed in the family trust. 40% was love. Faith. Me telling Conrad I believed he'd become the man this company needed. The dashboard clock read 6:43. 17 minutes until the gala started. I built this company with these hands. Opal and I started with a pickup truck, 2 shovels and a contract to dig foundation trenches in Schaumburg. That was 1987. We were young, broke, and we didn't know the first thing about running a business. But we knew how to work and keep our word. By 2012, when Opal got sick, Hoffman Infrastructure was the name people called when they needed something built right. And tonight I was handing it to Conrad. What does a father feel when he is about to give away 40% of everything he built? Not regret, not fear. Just hope that his son has become the man worthy of carrying it forward. Hope that somewhere beneath the expensive suits and the corner office and the wife who looks at me like I'm outdated furniture, there's still the boy who used to ride in the truck with me on Saturdays, asking about concrete and rebar. I pulled the envelope out one more time. The documents were simple. Irrevocable transfer of 40% ownership of Hoffman Infrastructure Group from Wendell Arthur Hoffman to Conrad James Hoffman, effective upon delivery and acceptance. My lawyer had warned me to put conditions on it, performance milestones, behavior clauses. I'd refused. You don't give your son a gift and then tell him he has to earn it. That's not a gift. That's a transaction. I slid the envelope back into my jacket. 6:58. I got out of the car. November wind hit my face cold and sharp, carrying exhaust and roasted chestnuts from a street vendor 2 blocks down. I walked toward the Palmer House entrance, where warm light spilled onto the sidewalk, and I could hear the muffled sound of a jazz quartet warming up inside. The company's 25th anniversary gala. 250 guests. Conrad had planned it, or rather his wife Simone had, and Conrad signed the checks. I hadn't been involved. Conrad said it would be a surprise and honor. He'd sent me a black invitation card 3 weeks ago, Wendell Hoffman, founder, written in gold script. I reached the entrance at 7:30. A young security guard stood inside the glass doors, clipboard in hand. He looked up as I approached, and his face flickered with confusion, then professional politeness. "Excuse me, sir," he said, stepping to block my path. "Are you with the catering team? Staff entrance is around back." I stopped. The words didn't land right away. I looked down at my navy blazer, my pressed khakis, my leather shoes Opal had resoled twice. Then I looked back at the guard. He was young, maybe 25, with a name tag that read Marcus Rivera. He wasn't being rude. He genuinely thought I was catering staff. "I am a guest," I said quietly. I pulled out the black invitation card. Marcus took it, and his face went red. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Please go ahead." He stepped aside. I walked past him into the warm lobby, but something cold had settled in my chest, right next to the envelope. Marcus wasn't new. The Palmer House used the same security team for corporate events. I'd seen him here in June at the Midwest Builders Coalition dinner. He should have recognized me. The founder of the company being celebrated tonight. The man whose name was on every contract, every cornerstone we'd laid for 37 years. But he didn't. I stopped just past the doors and looked around. Banners everywhere. Hoffman Infrastructure Group, 25 years of excellence. Photographs of our projects blown up to poster size: the Riverside Transit Hub, the Oak Brook Corporate Center, the Lakeview Medical Plaza. Buildings I had overseen personally, standing in the dirt with the crew checking measurements, making sure every foundation was level. And in every photograph, every banner, every promotional poster lining the walls, my face was gone. Not absent. Gone. Cropped out. Replaced with shots of buildings alone, or Conrad shaking hands with clients I'd never seen him meet. Pictures of the executive team. Pictures of project managers. Pictures of ribbon-cutting ceremonies I'd attended with me carefully edited out of the frame. I stood there in the cold, still clinging to my jacket, invitation in my hand, and I realized someone had erased me. Not carelessly, systematically, deliberately. Someone had gone through years of company history and removed every trace of my face. And the security guard didn't recognize me because, as far as the world knew, I had never existed. The envelope in my jacket suddenly felt heavier. My son's wife had been erasing me for years, and he let her. I walked toward the ballroom doors, carrying an envelope that would change my son's life. And I had no idea he had already decided I didn't belong in his story. In 15 minutes, he would make sure I wished I'd never walked through those doors at all. You know the feeling when you walk into a room full of people celebrating something you built, and not a single person looks up to see you arrive. The grand ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers I'd approved in the budget meeting last spring hung from coffered ceilings. Round tables dressed in white linen filled the floor, each one centered with arrangements of white roses and gold ribbon. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage. 250 guests in evening wear stood in clusters, champagne glasses, catching the light laughter echoing off marble walls. I stood in the doorway for 15 seconds. Not one person turned. I scanned the room for the family table. Every anniversary gala had one front and center directly below the stage reserved for the founder and immediate family. I'd sat there at the 20th anniversary 5 years ago with Opal's empty chair beside me and Conrad on my right back, when he still called me Dad instead of Wendell. I found the table. Spotlight above its centerpiece, twice the size of the others' name placards, in small gold frames, catching the light. I could see Conrad's name from across the room, and beside it, Simone's. Mine was gone. A young woman in a black suit approached with a tablet and a professional smile. Elena Morales, according to her name tag, seating coordinator, hired for the evening. She had no idea the casually dressed man in the navy blazer was the founder of the company being celebrated. "Good evening, sir. May I have your name?" Wendell Hoffman. She scrolled through her tablet, frowned slightly, scrolled again. Ah, here you are. Mr. Hoffman, you're at table 14, just past the service corridor near the kitchen. I looked at her. She looked back pleasant and waiting. Table 14, I repeated. Yes, sir. Straight back on the left. Can I help you find it? No, thank you. She moved on to the next guest. I stood there holding my invitation card, Wendell Hoffman Founder, written in gold script, and I understood. My name hadn't been forgotten. It had been moved. Removed from the family table where the founder belonged and placed at table 14. Near the kitchen, in the shadows. I walked past the VIP tables, past the corporate sponsors, past the investors and city officials and construction executives who'd worked with me for 30 years. None of them recognized me. I passed the family table and allowed myself one glance. Conrad Hoffman, 40 years old and CEO for a decade, sat at the center in a charcoal suit that cost more than most workers' monthly salary. He was laughing, head back, relaxed, one hand on the table, the other holding a glass of red wine. The same easy charisma he'd had since he was 16, when he figured out that people gave you things if you smiled the right way. Beside him sat Simone Hoffman, 37, head of corporate communications, in a gold dress that caught every light in the room. She leaned into the conversation with practiced grace, touching the arm of the investor seated to her left. The same woman who had spent 3 years systematically deleting her father-in-law's face from company history. She looked beautiful. She looked powerful. She looked like she belonged at that table. And I belonged at table 14. I found it in the back corner, half hidden by a marble pillar, close enough to the kitchen that I could hear the clatter of plates being stacked. The tablecloth was the same. The roses were the same. But the light didn't quite reach here, and the other 7 seats were empty. Just me in the shadows and the sound of my son's laughter carrying across the room. I sat down slowly, the envelope in my jacket pressed against my ribs. I paid for this room. I signed the contract for these chandeliers. I built the company that bought the champagne these people were drinking, and the roses on every table and the jazz quartet playing Sinatra near the stage. And my son put me next to the kitchen door. How does a father sit in the shadows, watching his son shine in a spotlight built with his own hands, and still believe that son deserves 40% of everything? I didn't have an answer. Across the room, near another pillar with a better view, I spotted Burton Castellano, 66 years old, chief operating officer, lifelong friend. We'd started working together in 1992, back when the company was just me and Opal and 8 workers. Burton sat alone at his table, a glass of water in front of him, his eyes steady and watchful. He saw me. Our eyes met across 250 people and 37 years of history. He gave a slight nod, not greeting, not pity, just acknowledgement. He knew where I was sitting. He knew what it meant, and he was watching. I looked back at the family table. Conrad was standing now, shaking hands with a silver-haired man I didn't recognize. Simone was beside him, her hand on Conrad's back, guiding him through the room like a show dog she'd trained. They moved together with the kind of coordination that comes from years of practice, a team, a unit. And I was the variable they'd removed from the equation. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier than it had in the car. Or maybe that was just my heart. I pulled it out just enough to see the corner. Plain manila slightly bent from sitting against my chest. Inside, irrevocable transfer of 40% ownership. The greatest gift a father could give. I'd signed it 3 days ago in Burton's office with Opal's photograph on the desk, watching me make the choice she would have questioned. I thought of her now. What would she say if she could see this table, this corner, this erasure? Would she tell me to stand up and walk out? Or would she tell me to wait to watch, to see if our son was truly lost or just temporarily blinded by the woman in the gold dress? I slid the envelope back into my jacket. The lights dimmed. Conversations quieted. The jazz quartet finished their song and left the stage. Above the platform, two massive LED screens flickered to life, and a voice came through the speakers, smooth, professional female. Simone's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 25th anniversary celebration of Hoffman Infrastructure Group. Applause filled the room. I sat in the shadows at table 14, watching my son stand and wave to the crowd like he'd built every brick himself. In my jacket pocket was a piece of paper that could change the entire course of his life. I still hadn't decided whether to take it out, but the screens above the stage were about to show me something that would help me decide. How does it feel to watch your entire life's work erased on a screen while 250 people applaud the lie? The LED screens above the stage lit up with the company logo, clean, modern, designed 3 years ago by the branding firm Simone hired. Below it, gold letters appeared, "The Hoffman Infrastructure Journey, 25 Years of Excellence." I leaned forward slightly at table 14, fingers resting on the envelope in my lap. The timeline began to scroll. A clean horizontal line divided into segments, each marked with a year, a milestone, a photograph. I watched the numbers appear from left to right. 2014, 2015, 2016. The timeline started in 2014. I sat back slowly, the chair creaking beneath me. 2014 was the year Conrad became CEO. The year he moved into the corner office and hired Simone to run communications. The year he started talking about modernizing the brand and updating the legacy and bringing fresh vision to an old company. It was not the year Hoffman Infrastructure was founded. 1987 was the year Hoffman Infrastructure was founded. The year Opal and I mortgaged our first home to meet payroll for 12 workers when a client delayed payment. The year we worked 16-hour days pouring foundations and learning accounting at night because we couldn't afford a bookkeeper. The year we decided that if we were going to build something, we would build it on integrity, not shortcuts. But 1987 was not on the screen. The presentation continued. Images of completed projects filled the displays, buildings I recognized, contracts I'd signed, ribbon cuttings I'd attended. But the captions told a different story. 2015, Hoffman Infrastructure secures first major municipal contract. That contract was our fourth municipal project. The first was in 1991. 2016, company expands to 200 employees. We'd hit 200 employees in 2000. By 2016, we employed over 400. Every milestone was shifted forward, every achievement reassigned. 27 years of history compressed into nothing, and the screen showed Conrad standing beside a steel beam at a construction site in 2014, smiling like he'd invented the concept of infrastructure. Two guests at the table beside me leaned close, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. Conrad Hoffman is incredible. The first one said, a man in his 50s with silver cufflinks. Built a billion-dollar company from nothing in just 10 years. The second guest, a woman in a navy dress, nodded. Self-made. That's what I call real vision. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. The screen glowed with numbers and milestones that never mentioned my name or Opal's, and I sat in the shadows, wondering how long my son had known his history had been rewritten. Had he approved the timeline? Had he seen it before tonight and said nothing? Or had Simone simply handed it to him, and he'd trusted her without asking where the first 27 years had gone? I wanted to believe he didn't know. I wanted to believe my son was careless, not cruel. But the timeline kept scrolling, and Opal's face never appeared. The woman who'd worked beside me every day until the cancer made it impossible. The woman who'd negotiated our first contract while 8 months pregnant because the client wouldn't take me seriously. The woman who'd kept the books and managed the payroll and personally called every worker's family when someone got injured on a site, making sure they had what they needed. She was gone, erased, as if she'd never existed. I felt the weight of the envelope shift slightly on my lap. The paper inside $640 million worth of ownership transfer suddenly felt like a mistake I hadn't yet made, but still had time to avoid. The presentation ended with applause. The screens faded to black, then lit up again with a photograph of Conrad standing in front of the Oakbrook Corporate Center, arms crossed, looking confident and powerful and entirely self-sufficient. I heard movement behind me, footsteps, the rustle of fabric. Then Simone's voice, bright and smooth, speaking to someone just over my shoulder. Gerald, this is one of our site workers from the early days. He's been with the company a long time. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes on the envelope. A man's voice responded, deep, disinterested, the tone of someone accustomed to being important. Ah, wonderful. Good to see loyal people. Gerald Harrington. Real estate development mogul from Boston, deep pockets and shallow interest in company history. Exactly the type of investor Simone cultivated, wealthy, influential, and too busy to ask questions about founders. I heard him turn away, his footsteps fading toward the bar. Simone lingered for a moment. I could feel her presence behind my chair, could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral. Then she moved on her heels, clicking against the marble floor. Site worker, not founder, not family. Not the man who'd signed the mortgage that kept the company alive in 1993 when we lost 2 major contracts in the same month. Not the man who'd personally guaranteed loans when banks wouldn't trust a small infrastructure firm. Not the father of the man she married. Site worker. When does a daughter-in-law stop being family and become an enemy? The moment she calls you a site worker in front of someone who could have been your partner. Or does it happen slowly over years, in 1,000 small cuts you don't notice until you're sitting alone at table 14, watching your wife's memory wiped from the record? I placed my hand flat on the envelope. The paper was warm from sitting against my chest for the last hour. I could still take it out. I could still walk to that center table, interrupt the champagne and the laughter and the congratulations, and hand my son the greatest gift a father could give. But I heard Simone's words again. Site worker. And I thought perhaps I need to sit here a little longer. The lights dimmed again. A spotlight hit the stage. Simone's voice came through the speakers, amplified and bright. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary founder and CEO of Hoffman Infrastructure Group, Conrad Hoffman. Visionary founder. The room erupted in applause. People stood. I stayed seated, watching my son climb the stairs to the stage, waving to the crowd like a man who'd built an empire with his own hands. He reached the microphone and smiled. The same smile I'd seen since he was 6 years old, the one that made people trust him even when they shouldn't. I looked down at the envelope on my lap one more time. Then I looked back at the stage, because the next voice I would hear was my son's, and I wanted to know if he would say my name. I taught this boy how to read blueprints when he was 16, and now I am about to hear him tell 250 people how he taught himself everything. Conrad stood at the microphone, spotlights blazing down on his charcoal suit. He placed both hands on the podium and leaned forward like politicians do when they want you to believe they're being genuine. Thank you, he said, his voice smooth and amplified. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this incredible journey. Applause rippled through the ballroom. I sat motionless at table 14. When I started this company, Conrad continued, I had nothing but a vision and the determination to make it real. No roadmap, no safety net. Just the belief that if I worked hard enough, if I made bold enough decisions, I could build something that mattered. I felt my chest tighten. He didn't start this company. He was 6 years old when this company started, in first grade, learning to spell his name, while Opal and I were learning how to bid municipal contracts and manage payroll. Every decision, Conrad said, every risk, every success, I built this with my own hands and my own mind. More applause. A standing ovation spreading backward like a wave. People on their feet celebrating the man who'd built an empire from absolute zero. I stayed seated. 10 minutes. He spoke for 10 minutes about sacrifice and vision and the challenges of building from nothing. He talked about his first major contract, the one Opal had negotiated in 2001 while he was in college. He talked about expanding the workforce, the expansion we'd completed in 2007, 3 years before he joined full-time. He did not say my name once. He did not say Opal's name once. He stood on that stage in a building I'd chosen, celebrating a company my wife and I had bled for, and he wrote us both out of it. I sat in the shadows and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, just profound, bone-deep sorrow. The speech ended. The crowd stood again, applause thundering. Conrad descended the stage steps and disappeared into a cluster of guests. I waited 3 minutes. Then I stood and walked toward the corridor beside the stage. Conrad was there, shaking hands with investors, laughing. I approached slowly, my hand moving to the envelope in my pocket. He saw me, his smile flickered. I stopped 2 feet away and began to pull the envelope out. "What are you doing, Dad?" He said, his voice low and sharp. He glanced at the investors, then back at me. "This isn't the time. I have something I want to give you," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Dad, you're making things awkward for me. Tonight is critical. Can you please just go sit down?" I stood there with the envelope half visible, looking at my son. He looked back at me with the expression people use when they're embarrassed by someone they wish would leave. "Please," he said again. Then he turned away. "Margaret David, so glad you could make it." I slid the envelope back into my jacket. When does a father give up on a son? When that son erases him from history. Or when that son refuses a gift worth $640 million because it makes things awkward. I walked back toward table 14, but didn't sit. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, watching the crowd, watching my son work the room like he owned it. The envelope felt different now. Heavier. Or maybe lighter. I couldn't tell anymore. At 9 o'clock, I made one more attempt. I walked toward the stage where Diane Fletcher, a professional event MC hired for the evening, stood at stage left with her clipboard and earpiece. She was checking her tablet when I approached. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like to say a few words." She looked up, polite but uncertain. "Oh, I'm sorry, are you?" "He's not on the program." Simone appeared from nowhere, stepping between me and the stage. She spoke quietly but firmly. "The program does not include this," she said. "You are not on the speaker list." Diane glanced at her tablet, then at Simone, then at me. She nodded awkwardly, agreeing without saying a word. I looked at Simone. Really looked at her. The gold dress, the perfect hair, the expression on her face, cool, controlled, dismissive. She was looking at me like I was a problem she'd already solved. I looked at Simone, and I saw 15 years compressed into this single moment. Every dismissive glance, every subtle erasure, every calculated move to make me disappear. "I am the founder of this company," I said quietly. "I understand," Simone replied, her tone professional and distant. "But the program has already been finalized. Perhaps next year." She smiled, small, polite final, and turned back toward the center tables. Diane gave me an apologetic shrug and returned to her clipboard. I stood there at stage left for 10 seconds. Then I walked back across the ballroom, past the laughter and champagne and celebration, back to table 14. I sat down slowly. The envelope was still in my jacket pocket. The same envelope I'd carried into this building 3 hours ago, full of hope and faith that my son had become a man worthy of everything I'd built. I pulled it out and placed it on the table. Plain manila, slightly creased. Inside, the transfer documents. The gift I'd intended to give tonight. I looked across the room at Simone, standing near the bar with investors laughing. She looked at me as though I was someone who did not belong here. I remembered her looking at me exactly like that the first time I met her 15 years ago, when Conrad brought her home for Thanksgiving, and she'd walked through my house like she was cataloging everything that needed to be replaced. I was wrong to think she would change, but what I did not know yet, what I would discover in exactly 10 minutes, is that my son would prove he never wanted me to belong here either. Because in 10 minutes, someone was going to hand me a coat. The coat lands in my hands before I can say a word. Expensive cashmere still warm from the man who just assumed I was hired to hold it. He was older than me, maybe 72, with silver hair combed back and a pinstriped suit that screamed old money. Harold Pemberton, a retired banking executive attending the gala as a potential investor. He had no idea the casually dressed man sitting near the kitchen door was the founder of the billion-dollar company he was considering backing. He handed me the coat without looking at my face, just extended it toward me with the casual expectation of someone who'd spent his whole life having other people take care of things for him. Then he nodded once toward the coat rack 15 feet away and walked toward the bar. I sat there for 3 seconds with his coat in my hands. Expensive fabric, probably $3,000. The kind of coat you hand to staff without thinking because you know it will be waiting for you when you're ready to leave. I looked across the room. Simone was standing with a group of VIP guests near the stage, champagne glass in hand. She was facing my direction. She saw the entire interaction. Our eyes met for half a second. She smiled, not broadly, just a small, knowing curve of her lips. Then she turned back to her conversation without saying a word to correct the mistake, without walking over to explain that I wasn't hotel staff, without doing anything at all except smile. I stood up slowly. The envelope in my jacket shifted against my ribs. I walked to the coat rack carrying Harold Pemberton's cashmere like I was hired to hold it. I hung it carefully on an empty hook, made sure it wouldn't slip off, straightened the collar. I built this room. I paid for these racks. I approved the budget for the crystal chandeliers hanging above my head and the marble floors beneath my feet and the jazz quartet that had played earlier and every glass of champagne being poured tonight. And a man just handed me his coat, as though I was here to serve him. I stood at that coat rack for 3 seconds, my hands still on the cashmere, and I thought Opal would have walked out of this room by now. Why am I still here? I didn't have an answer. I walked back to table 14 and sat down. The envelope was still in my jacket. The same envelope I'd tried to give Conrad an hour ago before he told me I was making things awkward. The same envelope containing documents that would transfer more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. I pulled it out and placed it on the white tablecloth in front of me. Plain manila, slightly creased from being carried against my chest all evening. I looked at it and wondered what Opal would say if she could see me now sitting in the shadows at my own company's anniversary gala, holding a gift my son didn't want, wearing the coat she'd bought me in 2003, because she believed a real man doesn't need clothes to speak for him. She was wrong about that. Tonight proved it. Tonight clothes were the only thing speaking, and mine were saying I didn't belong here. I heard footsteps approaching, heels clicking on marble. I knew who it was before I looked up. Simone stopped beside my table. She was alone now, her champagne glass empty, her expression pleasant and professional, like we were having a casual conversation at a family dinner. "It must be lonely sitting here all by yourself, Dad," she said. I looked up at her, said nothing. "Sure. Do you want something useful to do?" She continued, her voice sweet with an edge I recognized now as the same tone she'd used for 15 years. "The VIP table needs someone to help serve wine. I'm sure they'd appreciate it." I kept my eyes on hers, still said nothing. She smiled. That same small smile she'd given me when Harold Pemberton handed me his coat. "Just think about it, Dad," she said. Then she turned and walked back toward the center of the ballroom, her gold dress catching every light. I sat there at table 14, hands folded on the white tablecloth, the envelope between my palms. She just asked me to serve wine, not suggested I join the VIP conversation, not invited me to meet the investors, not acknowledged me as family or founder or the man who'd signed every major contract that made tonight possible. She asked me to serve wine. At what point does a man stop being a father and become just an obstacle to be managed? When his daughter-in-law asks him to serve wine, or when he actually considers it? I looked down at the envelope. The paper was bent at the corners, now worn from being carried and pulled out and put away. Inside were documents my lawyer had prepared 3 days ago, with the kind of careful language lawyers use when they're transferring obscene amounts of money. Irrevocable transfer of 40% ownership, the greatest gift a father could give. And the son didn't want it because it made things awkward. And the daughter-in-law wanted me to serve drinks. I thought about Opal, about the day she got sick in 2012 and made me promise I'd take care of Conrad, make sure he understood what we'd built and why it mattered. I'd kept that promise. I'd kept it for 6 years since she passed through every dismissive comment and every subtle erasure and every moment when I should have seen what was happening but told myself I was being too sensitive. I'd kept the promise until tonight. I looked across the ballroom at my son. He was standing near the bar with a group of investors laughing at something one of them said. He looked happy, successful, confident. He looked like a man who'd built an empire and was celebrating his achievement. He looked nothing like the boy I'd taught to read blueprints, the boy who used to ride in the truck with me on Saturdays, asking questions about concrete and rebar. I built this room. My daughter-in-law just asked me if I wanted to serve wine, and the envelope in my jacket pocket, hundreds of millions in shares, suddenly feels like the stupidest thing I have ever carried. But I do not know yet that my son is about to make the decision for me, because in 5 minutes, he is going to choose whose side he is on. My son cannot look me in the eye. That is how I know he is about to choose her over me. I saw him coming from across the ballroom. Simone had caught his attention. Near the bar, nodded in my direction and whispered something I couldn't hear. Conrad glanced toward table 14, where I sat with the envelope in front of me. His expression shifted, not anger, not concern, just tired annoyance. He walked over slowly. When he reached my table, he leaned down close. "Dad," he said quietly, "you're drawing unnecessary attention to yourself. Tonight is important for our family." I looked up at him, at my son. 40 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than the truck Opal and I drove when we started this company. "Our family," I repeated slowly. He straightened, breaking eye contact. "You know what I mean, Dad." "Do I?" He looked past me over my shoulder anywhere except at my face. "This is a big night. Important people are here. I need you to understand that." "I understand," I said. "I understand that when you say our family, you mean you and Simone." "Dad, I understand that I am not part of the family you are protecting tonight." He finally looked at me. For just a second, our eyes met, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not defiance, not confidence, just discomfort. The look of a man who knows he's doing something wrong but has already committed to it. "I have to get back," he said. Then he turned and walked away. I sat there watching my son rejoin the investors. Simone touched his arm, said something, and they both laughed. He looked relieved, like he'd just handled an awkward situation. My son does not look me in the eye. I brought him into this world. I taught him everything. And he cannot look me in the eye. When does a father stop being part of the family? When his son says our family and means everyone except him, or when that son cannot even look him in the eye while saying it. I picked up the envelope from the table, held it for a moment. Then I slid it back into my jacket pocket. The paper felt different now, not heavier or lighter, just wrong. I heard footsteps again, multiple sets this time. I looked up. Simone was walking toward me with a young server following behind. Rachel Dunn, 26 years old, working the Palmer House gala circuit for extra income. She carried a silver tray with wine glasses, completely unaware she was about to become a prop in the final humiliation of the man who built the company being celebrated. Simone stopped beside my table. She reached out and took one of the glasses from Rachel's tray. Then she extended it toward me. "Your dad," she said, her voice bright and helpful. "VIP table 3 is waiting." I looked at the glass. Red wine. The same color Conrad had been drinking during his speech. I looked at Simone. She was smiling. That same plastic smile. The smile that said she was in control, that everything was going according to plan, that I was finally learning my place. I stood up slowly. The movement surprised her. Her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She'd expected me to take the glass or refuse quietly. She hadn't expected me to stand. "I came here as a guest of the family," I said. My voice was quiet but steady. Her smile returned colder now. "You're making everyone uncomfortable, Dad." "Am I?" "Yes." She pushed the wine glass closer. "So why don't you help out, make yourself useful? Table 3, just over there." I looked at the glass in her hand. At her face. At Rachel standing behind her, with the tray looking uncomfortable. At the ballroom full of people celebrating a company I'd built with my wife's help and my own hands. I stand there facing my daughter-in-law, and for the first time tonight, I am not sitting down, not hiding in the shadows of table 14, and I realize I should have stood up hours ago. "No," I said. Simone blinked. "Excuse me. No. I will not serve wine at VIP table 3. I will not make myself useful in the way you are suggesting. I am not staff. I am the founder of this company." Her expression changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. "You're being difficult," she said quietly. Conrad was right. "You don't understand what's at stake tonight." "I understand perfectly." "Then sit down and stop making a scene." I didn't move. We stood there facing each other, her holding the wine glass between us like a weapon she hadn't yet decided whether to use. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, the tray clinking slightly. Someone at a nearby table glanced over, then quickly looked away. "Just take it," Simone said. Her voice was still quiet, but the sweetness was gone. "Take the glass, Dad. VIP table 3 is waiting." I looked at my daughter-in-law, at the glass of red wine, at the 15 years of small cuts and subtle erasures that had led to this moment. "No one," I said again. She stared at me for 3 long seconds. Then she turned to Rachel, said something I couldn't hear, and walked away toward the center of the ballroom. Rachel gave me an apologetic look and followed the wine glasses shifting on the silver tray. I stood there alone, not sitting, not hiding, finally refusing to disappear. "I do not take that glass of wine." I look at my daughter-in-law walking away, and I see she has already made her choice. I just don't know how far my son will go to protect her. But I am about to find out, because someone in this ballroom has a phone, and they are already recording. In 90 seconds, my son is going to make a decision that cannot be undone. The red wine seeps into the fabric of my blazer before I can even process what my son just did, before I can understand that the boy I raised just poured a glass over my head in front of 250 people. It happened fast. Too fast to stop. The cold liquid hit my hair, my forehead, my face trickling down into the collar of the old navy blazer that Opal had bought 21 years ago. Simone had walked back toward the center tables after I refused the wine glass. I'd thought maybe the worst was over. Thought maybe I'd finally drawn a line. I was wrong. She caught Conrad's attention, gestured to Rachel, who still stood nearby with the wine tray, took another glass and handed it to my son. Then she leaned close to his ear and whispered something I couldn't hear. Conrad looked at me, just for 1 second. Our eyes met across the ballroom. Then he raised the glass high enough for the entire room to see. People who don't know their place. He said, his voice loud and clear, projecting across the marble and crystal, don't deserve to stand next to successful people. And he poured. The wine hit the top of my head first. Cold and wet and shocking. Then it ran down my face into my eyes, dripping off my chin. I felt it soak into my hair, felt it seep through the fabric of the jacket Opal had picked out at a small shop in Brooklyn in 2003. She'd said it would last forever if I took care of it. The wine kept flowing, down my shirt collar, down my chest, staining everything it touched. Someone in the crowd gasped. A sharp intake of breath from one of the nearby tables. Simone laughed. Not quietly, not discreetly. A full, bright laugh that carried across the ballroom. At least now you look like a real server, she said. More laughter. Not from everyone, but from enough people. Nervous laughter that happens when something shocking occurs, and people don't know how else to react. I stood completely still. The wine dripped from my chin onto the white marble floor, small, dark red drops forming a pattern at my feet. And I thought, this is the son I taught to read, to work to lead, and he just did this in front of everyone who matters to him. I raised my hand slowly and wiped the wine from my eyes with 2 fingers. My hand was steady. I looked at Conrad. He was standing 5 feet away, the empty wine glass still in his hand, watching me, waiting for something. Maybe waiting for me to yell, to fight back, to make a scene that would prove he'd been right to do this. I said nothing. I looked at him for 3 long seconds. Just looked. At my son. At the man who'd just done this in the ballroom his mother and I had built. Then I reached into my inner jacket pocket. The envelope was there, still tucked against my chest where it had been all evening. I pulled it out slowly. The bottom left corner was soaked. Dark red wine spreading through the manila paper. I looked at it, held it up so I could see the damage clearly in the chandelier light. This was the document that would have given my son 40% of everything I built. The transfer papers my lawyer had prepared 3 days ago. The gift that would have made Conrad one of the wealthiest men in Chicago. And his own hand had just poured wine onto it. I stood there holding the stained envelope, feeling the wine drip from my hair onto my shoulders, and I realized he has no idea what this is. He saw me try to give it to him earlier and dismissed it. He has no idea that the paper in my hand is worth more money than he will ever see again in his lifetime. No idea that he just destroyed his own inheritance. I looked at the envelope one more time, at the wine stain spreading across the corner. At my name printed in the return address, Wendell A. Hoffman, founder. Then I slid it back into my jacket pocket. I adjusted the collar of my blazer, wiped one more drop of wine from my cheek, and I turned toward the exit. I walked through that ballroom the same way I walked into it 2 hours ago, carrying an envelope that could change a life. But now the envelope is soaked in wine, and the life it was meant to change just threw it away without even knowing. My shoes clicked on the marble floor, each step echoing in a room that had gone suddenly perfectly quiet. 250 people watching me walk away. No one moving. No one speaking. I could feel their eyes on my back. Could feel the weight of their phones held up recording this moment, capturing the image of the old man in the wine-stained jacket walking out of his own company's anniversary gala. I passed table 14, past the coat rack where I'd hung Harold Pemberton's cashmere, past the banners showing the rewritten history. I kept walking. No one called me back. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. Not a single guest or colleague who'd worked with me for 30 years. Not even Burton, though I knew he was in that room somewhere watching. No one asked if I was all right. I reached the tall double doors at the back of the ballroom, pushed them open, stepped through into the bright hallway beyond. The doors closed behind me with a soft click. I stood there in the empty corridor, hotel staff, hurrying past with trays and linens, none of them looking at the old man with wine in his hair. I reached into my jacket and felt the envelope. Still there. Still damp. The paper soft and damaged where the wine had soaked through. I leave that room. No one calls me back. No one asks if I am all right. Only the sound of my shoes on the marble floor. And in my jacket pocket, a wine-soaked envelope containing hundreds of millions my son will never see. But upstairs in that ballroom, the phones are still recording, and in 14 seconds, someone is going to post the video. The white towel appears in front of me before I even realize someone has stopped the first act of kindness in 3 hours offered by a stranger who has no idea I just lost my son. I was standing in the hotel hallway outside the ballroom, wine still dripping from the collar of my blazer, staring at nothing in particular. The corridor was bright and empty, the thick carpet muffling the sound of footsteps and room service carts. Then I heard wheels stopping. I looked up. A young woman stood beside her service cart, holding a clean white towel. Margot Delacroix, 23 years old, working the evening shift at the Palmer House to supplement her income. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of face that looked both tired and determined at the same time. She looked at me at the wine staining my hair and face and jacket, and didn't ask what happened. Didn't stare. Didn't offer sympathy or pity or anything except the towel. "Sir, would you like to use this?" she said quietly. I looked at her, at the towel, at her eyes that saw a man who needed help and offered it without calculation or judgment. "Thank you, young lady," I said. I took the towel from her hand. It was warm from the cart, freshly laundered, soft against my fingers. She nodded once. Then she pushed her cart down the hallway and disappeared around the corner back to whatever work she'd been doing before she saw me. She didn't know who I was. She only saw a man who needed a towel. I held the white cloth and thought, this is the only person who was kind to me tonight. A stranger making minimum wage who stopped because helping people was simply what you did when you saw they needed it. I wiped the wine from my face slowly, from my hair, from the back of my neck where it had dripped down beneath my collar. The towel came away dark red, stained with the same wine my son had poured over my head in front of everyone who mattered to him. I folded the towel and set it on a nearby console table. Then I walked toward the elevator bank. The elevator arrived empty. I stepped inside and the doors closed, sealing me in a small mirrored box of polished brass and soft lighting. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. The wine had soaked through the navy blazer, Opal's blazer, leaving dark stains across the shoulders and chest. My hair was matted and wet. My shirt collar was ruined. I looked exactly like what Simone had called me, a server who'd had an accident. I stand in that elevator watching the numbers descend, 10, 9, 8. And I think about the numbers ascending in the ballroom, the deal Conrad believes he's about to close, the applause he expects, the power he thinks he has. I pulled out my phone. Burton answered on the first ring. "I am waiting, Wendell," he said. His voice was calm, steady. The voice of a man who'd been expecting this call. "Activate the Founder's Clause," I said. My voice was quiet but clear. "Withdraw my personal guarantee before 10 o'clock. Send out the notice for emergency board meeting. Cancel all transfer documents." Silence for 2 seconds. Then, confirmed, the call ended. 14 seconds. That was all the time I needed. 14 seconds to undo everything my son believed was his. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. I stepped out into the marble-floored space with its chandeliers and potted palms and late evening quiet. A few guests walked past, dressed for dinner, laughing about something. None of them looked at the old man with wine in his hair. I walked to a leather chair near the windows and sat down. Pulled out my phone again. Waited. 90 seconds later, it vibrated. Text from Burton. "Personal guarantee withdrawn. 9:41 p.m. confirmed. Notice for emergency board meeting sent at 9:42 p.m. Meeting at 11 p.m. at headquarters. Contacting development partners now. I read the message twice. Then I looked up at the tall windows facing the street. Chicago at night. November cold settling over the city. Car lights passing by in streams of white and red. People going home or going out or going somewhere that mattered to them. The world continuing exactly as it had before, unaware that in a hotel ballroom, 4 floors above me, a man's entire future had just changed, without him knowing it yet. A father does not feel triumph when he destroys his son's future with a 14-second phone call. Not satisfaction either. Just the hollow certainty that this was the only choice left. I thought about the envelope in my jacket pocket. The wine-soaked transfer documents that would have given Conrad 40%. The gift he'd destroyed with his own hand, literally by pouring wine over it. I thought about Opal, about what she would say if she were here. Would she tell me I'd done the right thing, or would she tell me I should have walked away years ago before it came to this? I didn't know. I would never know. I only knew that I had built something from nothing. That I had worked for 37 years to create a company that employed hundreds of people and built real things and mattered. And I had watched my son take credit for all of it, erase me and his mother from history, treat me like hired help, and then pour wine over my head when I refused to disappear. I did nothing to him. I only took away what was never his to begin with. The clock on the wall read 9:42. Upstairs in the grand ballroom, Conrad was preparing to sign the biggest deal of his career. A development contract for 3 major projects that would expand Hoffman infrastructure into new territory. A deal that required my personal guarantee as founder, the guarantee that backed every major contract we'd ever signed, the guarantee that made partners trust us, the guarantee that said, Wendell Hoffman stands behind this company. The guarantee I'd just withdrawn at 9:41. Conrad didn't know that signature would mean absolutely nothing. He didn't know that the partners were about to receive calls from their lawyers. He didn't know that the gears had already turned and the floor was about to disappear beneath him. I put my phone in my pocket and stood up, walked toward the exit. Behind me up in the ballroom, my son was still laughing, still celebrating, still believing he'd won. In 13 minutes, he was going to find out. Because at 9:55, the development partners were going to receive a very specific phone call. I sat in the lobby downstairs and waited, watching the clock tick toward 9:55, knowing exactly the moment my son would hear my name for the first time that night. Not from my mouth, but from the people who controlled his future. Burton called me at 10:12 to tell me what happened. I asked him to describe it exactly as he saw it, every detail, because I wanted to understand the moment my son realized he'd been playing with power he never actually held. This is what Burton told me. At 9:55, Conrad stood at the signing table in the grand ballroom. The contract was laid out in front of him, 3 major development projects, expansion into new markets, the biggest deal of his career. Thomas Archer, senior development partner at Archer and Associates, with 30 years of experience structuring commercial real estate deals, stood across the table with his team. Lawyers flanked both sides. Simone stood beside Conrad, her hand resting on his shoulder. Conrad reached for the pen. Then Archer's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, and answered. Yes. Burton said. Archer's face changed completely. Went from relaxed confidence to sharp concern in the span of 3 seconds. When? Archer said into the phone. Then, are you certain? He walked away from the table, quickly, phone pressed to his ear, and found a corner of the ballroom where he could talk privately. His lawyer followed. They spoke in hushed tones for 3 minutes while Conrad stood at the signing table, pen in hand, waiting. When Archer returned, his expression was professional but tight. We need to halt the signing, he said. Conrad laughed. Actually laughed. What, we're literally standing here ready to The personal guarantee was just withdrawn, Archer said. Without the backing, we cannot proceed. The ballroom went quiet. Not completely silent. There were still 200 people scattered around talking and drinking, but the space around the signing table fell into the kind of silence that happens when something important breaks. Conrad stared at him. What? The personal guarantee backing the loan, Archer repeated. It was withdrawn. My team just received confirmation from the bank. That's impossible, Simone said. Her voice was sharp. Who has the authority to... Who withdrew it? Conrad interrupted. Archer looked straight at him. Wendell Hoffman. My son hears my name. For the first time tonight, he hears my name from someone else's mouth. And it is not a greeting. It is an ending. Burton told me Conrad's face went completely white. Not red with anger, not flushed with embarrassment. White. The color of someone realizing they'd been standing on ground that just disappeared beneath them. My father, Conrad said slowly. The trustee of the Wendell Hoffman Family Trust, Archer corrected. The guarantee was withdrawn at 9:41 p.m. We received formal notice 14 minutes ago. I was not in that room, but Burton later told me my son's face went completely white when he heard my name, not because he feared me, but because for the first time he understood he had never been the one in control. This is a mistake, Simone said. She stepped forward, her voice taking on the smooth, professional tone she used when managing problems. Conrad is CEO. He has full authority to approve this contract. We can proceed. Archer shook his head. The loan agreement requires the founder's personal guarantee. Without it, the bank will not disburse funds. Without disbursement, we have no deal. Then we'll get it reinstated, Conrad said. His voice was rising now, losing the practiced calm. This is clearly some kind of administrative error. I'll call... It wasn't an error, Archer said quietly. The withdrawal was deliberate and properly executed. I'm sorry, Conrad. Until this is resolved, we can't move forward. He picked up the unsigned contract from the table, slid it back into his briefcase, and walked away with his team. Conrad stood there for 10 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and walked to a corner of the ballroom, Simone following close behind. Burton watched from across the room as Conrad made the call. Patricia Sterling, senior loan manager at First National Bank of Illinois, answered. She'd been expecting the call. Burton knew this because he'd spoken to her 15 minutes earlier, confirming that her team would deliver the news to Conrad, with professional coldness honed from 2 decades of telling CEOs what they didn't want to hear about their credit authority. Conrad spoke urgently into the phone. Burton couldn't hear the exact words from where he stood, but he could see Conrad's body language tense, aggressive, demanding. Then Conrad's voice rose loud enough to carry across the ballroom. I am the CEO, he said. I can sign for it. Burton told me he could hear Sterling's response through the phone, even from 15 feet away. Her voice was cold and clear. You are not the trustee, she said. Your signature holds no weight in this matter, Mr. Hoffman. Conrad froze, just stood there with the phone pressed to his ear mouth slightly open, like someone had just explained to him that gravity worked differently than he'd believed his entire life. He was discovering that he had been playing with power he never actually held. That his signature, the one he used to claim credit for building an empire, was legally meaningless without his father's approval. Burton said Conrad tried to argue, said something about being CEO for 10 years, about running the company, about having authority. But Sterling cut him off. The trustee controls the family trust, she said. The trust controls 82% of company shares. The trust provides the personal guarantee. You are not the trustee, your father is, and your father just withdrew his guarantee. Unless he reinstates it, this deal is dead. The call ended. Conrad stood in the corner of the ballroom, phone in hand. And for the first time in 10 years, as CEO, he understood something. I'd known since the day I signed those trust documents with Opal 30 years ago. He has been CEO because I allowed it. And I have just taken that permission away. But Burton told me there was one more thing. Conrad doesn't know yet what is about to appear on the screens behind him. Because at 10:10, the MC is going to receive an urgent message. 10 minutes after my son learned his signature meant nothing. The screens in that ballroom told 250 people the same truth, and he still could not accept it. Burton called me at 10:14 to describe what happened when the screens changed. At 10:10, the LED displays above the stage, the same screens that had shown the erased timeline earlier, flickered. The anniversary logo disappeared. In its place, stark white text on a black background. Signing ceremony postponed. Please await further notice. The ballroom went quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. 250 people stared at the screens, then at each other, then at Conrad standing near the corner with his phone still in his hand. Burton said Conrad's face went red. Not the white shock from earlier. Red. The color of someone whose humiliation is becoming public. He walked toward the stage. Not walked, stormed. Simone tried to grab his arm, but he pulled away. He climbed the stairs to the platform where Diane Fletcher stood with her clipboard looking confused and uncomfortable. Conrad grabbed the microphone from her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice amplified across the ballroom, "there has been a misunderstanding. I am the CEO of this company, and I demand the program continue as planned." Diane Fletcher looked at him, then at the screens, then back at him. "Sir," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice from being picked up by the microphone, "the order came from a higher authority. I was told, no one has a higher authority than me in this company." Conrad interrupted. He was still holding the microphone, speaking to the entire ballroom now. "I built this empire. I run this company. And I say the ceremony proceeds." The MC remained silent. Just stood there looking at him with the kind of expression people wear when they're watching someone destroy themselves and don't know how to stop it. What does a man sound like when he demands authority he no longer possesses, like my son on that stage, loud, insistent, and utterly powerless? My son stands on the stage I paid to build, holding the microphone I hired people to install, and declares no one has a higher power than him. I sit in the lobby downstairs drinking water and wait. Burton told me the silence in that ballroom lasted 8 seconds. 8 seconds of Conrad standing on stage with the microphone, 250 guests staring at him, and no one saying a word. Then someone's phone buzzed. Then another. Then a dozen phones lighting up across the room with notifications. I learned later what those notifications said. What video had just started spreading across social media at exactly 10:15. Someone in that ballroom. Burton suspected it was one of the catering staff who'd witnessed the wine incident had posted the clip. 37 seconds of footage showing a man in a charcoal suit pouring red wine over an older man in a navy blazer. The audio was clear enough to hear the words, "People who don't know their place don't deserve to stand next to successful people." The caption read, "Chicago elite assaults elderly server at $1 million gala. Before I tell you how that clip went viral and what happened when they saw it, comment A, if you think people will side with my son, or B, if they'll defend the old man who got wine poured on him. Tell me why in one sentence. Please note what follows includes adapted details for narrative impact. The video hit social media at 10:15. By 10:16, it had 50 shares. By 10:17, 300. The algorithm picked it up. Outrage spreads faster than any other emotion online, and this had all the elements: wealth, cruelty, public humiliation, an old man who couldn't fight back. Comments started flooding in. Does anyone know what company's gala this is? What's that CEO's name? This is disgusting. Someone identify these people. And I hope that old man sues them into the ground. Burton watched it happen in real time. Guests in the ballroom looking at their phones, eyes widening, heads turning to look at Conrad on the stage, then at Simone standing near the front tables. Recognition dawning across faces. They were putting it together. The man in the charcoal suit in the video. The CEO standing on stage right now. The clip spreads across phones in that ballroom like a virus, and I think they are not angry because he poured wine on a billionaire. They are angry because he poured wine on an old man who could not fight back. Simone saw it too. Burton said she pulled out her phone, saw the video, saw the comments, and her face changed. The practiced confidence disappeared. For the first time all night, she looked genuinely afraid. She walked quickly to the stage and pulled Conrad aside. He was still holding the microphone but had stopped talking. She whispered urgently in his ear. Burton couldn't hear the exact words, but he saw her showing Conrad her phone screen. Conrad looked at it. His face went from red to white again. We need to control the narrative. Simone said loud enough now for people nearby to hear. Right now, before this gets worse. But it was already worse. The video had been online for 5 minutes and had 17,000 views. The comments were multiplying faster than anyone could read them. And here's what Burton told me mattered most. They didn't know who the person in that clip was. They hadn't recognized me. The footage was shot from an angle that showed my back more than my face. The navy blazer, the wine-soaked shoulders, an old man being humiliated. The outrage wasn't about power or money or corporate politics. It was about basic human decency. About watching someone pour wine over another person's head and recognizing it as cruelty. They do not know who the person in that clip is. They only see an old man getting wine poured over him, and they are already angry enough just at that. But in 5 minutes, someone in that ballroom is going to connect the dots, because Burton is about to step into the center of that room and request the microphone. Burton had been sitting near that pillar for 3 hours, watching everything, waiting for my signal. And at 10:20, I sent him a single text message with just 2 words, "Tell them." He called me 2 minutes later to describe what happened when he stood up. This is what he told me. At 10:20, Burton walked from his table near the marble pillar to the center of the grand ballroom. He moved slowly, deliberately, so everyone could see him coming. Conversations quieted as he passed. People turned to watch. He reached the stage where Diane Fletcher still stood, with her clipboard looking exhausted and uncertain. Burton held out his hand for the microphone. She gave it to him without a word. Burton stood in the center of the ballroom, 250 people watching him. And he spoke with the calm precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice amplified and clear, "I am Burton Castellano, Chief Operating Officer and independent co-trustee of the Wendell Hoffman Family Trust." The room went completely silent. Not the kind of quiet that happens when a speaker starts talking. The kind that happens when people sense something important is about to be said, and they don't want to miss a single word. Burton paused. Let the silence settle. Then he continued. "The man you just watched in that clip, the man who had wine poured over him tonight, is Wendell Hoffman, the founder of Hoffman Infrastructure Group, the owner of 82% of the shares of this company, and the personal guarantor for the $1.2 billion loan you were all just preparing to sign. Burton speaks my name to that room of 250 people, and I imagine the exact moment the silence falls heavier than the wine that fell from that glass 90 minutes ago. I wasn't there. I was sitting in the hotel lobby 4 floors below, drinking water from a plastic cup, watching the clock tick toward 10:23. But Burton told me later he could hear the exact moment comprehension spread through that ballroom. It started with gasps. Sharp intakes of breath from people who'd seen the video and were now understanding who the victim actually was. Then murmurs. Then louder conversations. That was the founder. Conrad poured wine on his own father. The man who owns 82%. Burton said he watched their faces change. Shock, disgust, anger. The same people who'd been celebrating Conrad an hour ago were now looking at him like he was a stranger who'd just revealed something monstrous about himself. Conrad stood near the front tables, frozen. Burton said his face had gone completely white again, not red with anger or embarrassment. White. The color of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. Simone stood beside him, her hand on his arm, her expression shifting from confused to calculating to afraid in the span of 10 seconds. Burton held the microphone and waited. Let them process. Let them understand. Then Conrad moved. He pushed through the crowd toward Burton Simone, following behind. He reached the center of the ballroom and faced Burton directly. What are you talking about?" Conrad said. His voice was loud but shaky. "My father is retired. He handed the company to me years ago." Burton looked at him with the expression of a man delivering news he'd known would come eventually. "Mr. Wendell never transferred the shares," Burton said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, the way lawyers speak when they're stating irrefutable facts. "Your position as CEO is an appointed role subject to immediate revocation under the terms of the family trust." Simone stepped forward. "That's impossible," she said. Her voice had lost all its smoothness. "Conrad has been CEO for 10 years. He runs this company. He signs the contracts. He signs contracts as an appointed officer." Burton interrupted. "Not as an owner. The trust controls 82% of company shares. Mr. Wendell is the sole trustee. I serve as independent co-trustee for legal oversight. Conrad has never owned shares. He has never had voting control. He has been CEO because Mr. Wendell appointed him to that position." The ballroom was silent again. But this time it was different. This time people weren't waiting for more information. They were processing what they'd just heard. He was discovering that everything he thought he'd built was actually just borrowed. The power he wielded, the title he claimed, the empire he boasted about, all of it had existed only because his father allowed it. "I can show you the records right now if you wish," Burton said quietly. He pulled out his phone. "Trust documents, corporate filings, share certificates, all publicly accessible, all showing the same thing. Wendell Hoffman owns 82%. Conrad Hoffman owns 0. Conrad stared at him, then at the phone, then around the ballroom at 250 pairs of eyes staring back at him. Board members, investors, partners, colleagues he'd worked with for years, clients he'd courted, people who'd called him visionary and self-made and brilliant, and every single one of them now knew the truth. I imagine that was the moment he finally understood he'd never built anything. He'd been given a title and mistaken it for power. He'd been handed authority and confused it with ownership. He'd spent 10 years believing he was the empire when he was actually just the appointed manager. Burton told me Conrad stood there for 15 seconds without speaking. Just stood there in the center of that ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of his reputation, holding on to a lie that everyone now knew was false. Then he turned and walked away. Not toward the exit, just away, toward the edge of the ballroom where the shadows were deeper and fewer people could see his face. Simone followed him, her gold dress catching the chandelier light one last time before they disappeared into the crowd. Burton handed the microphone back to Diane Fletcher and walked calmly back to his table. "He called me at 10:24. "It is done," he said. That was all. 2 words. The same number I'd sent him to start this. I sat in the hotel lobby and finished my water. The clock on the wall read 10:26. In 34 minutes, there would be an emergency board meeting in a conference room on the 12th floor. My son stands among 250 people, and for the first time he understands he has never owned a single thing. But he does not know yet that in 38 minutes, there is an emergency board meeting, and he is not invited. Because at 11 o'clock, 7 out of 9 board members are going to vote on his future. 7 board members voted to end my son's career at 11:23, but I was not in the room when they did it. I was at home, sitting in the dark, waiting for Burton's call. I'd left the Palmer house at 10:40. Took a taxi back to Evanston, let myself in through the front door, and sat in the living room without turning on any lights. Just sat there in the dark, waiting. The emergency board meeting convened at 11 o'clock in a conference room on the 12th floor. Burton told me later they'd reserved it 3 hours in advance the moment I'd given him the signal. Full quorum under Delaware corporate bylaws. 9 board members. Leland Lindsay presiding as chairman, the same man who'd worked as a site engineer under me 40 years ago on the Schaumburg project. Burton said Leland opened the meeting at 11:02. The charges are threefold, Leland said. Conduct causing severe and documented damage to corporate reputation. Unauthorized use of corporate assets for personal gain. And intentional concealment of material information from this board. Burton had prepared the documentation. The wine-pouring video now approaching 200,000 shares. Financial records showing Conrad had redirected $12 million earmarked for the Riverside Transit Hub project into stock buybacks, timed to inflate the share price in the weeks before the anniversary gala. So investors would see impressive numbers on the same night. He claimed sole credit for building the company. Emails showing years of systematic erasure of me and Opal from corporate materials, both of them knowing exactly what they were doing. The vote was called at 11:23. All in favor of immediate suspension, Leland said. 7 hands. Opposed. 2 hands. Conrad's allies. The resolution passes, Leland said. Mr. Conrad Hoffman is hereby suspended as CEO of Hoffman Infrastructure Group effective immediately. 7 votes out of 9. That is how many people it took to end 10 years of my son's illusion of power, and I was not in the room when it happened because I had already gone home. Burton transmitted written notice to the bank at 11:15. To the development partners at 11:16. By 11:20, every major stakeholder knew Conrad Hoffman no longer had authority to sign contracts, approve expenditures, or represent the company. Burton called me at 11:24. 7 out of 9, he said. Your son is suspended. I was still sitting in the dark. The phone glowed in my hand. Did he try to attend? I asked. Security would not let him into the building, Burton said. He came to the conference center entrance at 10:58. They had his photo. They turned him away. I closed my eyes. Tried to imagine my son standing outside being told he couldn't enter, realizing that even security guards had more authority than he did. Thank you, Burton, I said. There's one more thing, he said. Priscilla has something to show the board. The envelope. She picked it up from the ballroom floor after you left. I see, I said. He didn't hang up. Put the phone on speaker so I could hear. Priscilla's voice came through clear and professional. Before we adjourn, she said, you all need to know this. Something being placed on the table. Paper sliding across wood. This is the transfer document for 40% of the shares to Conrad Hoffman, Priscilla said. Prepared for signing tonight. I found it on the ballroom floor near table 14. Silence through the phone. As you can see, Priscilla continued, the envelope is damaged. The documents inside are soaked in red wine. The bottom left corner is completely stained, and Mr. Wendell's signature line is left blank. More silence, then Leland's voice quiet. How much is 40% worth? At current valuation, Priscilla said approximately $640 million. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else whispered something I couldn't make out. The wine-soaked envelope sits on that conference table like evidence at a trial proof that my son destroyed his own inheritance without even knowing what he was destroying. Jaledi, he was going to give this to Conrad tonight, Burton said. One signature away, total transfer of 40% ownership. Conrad would have had real power, real wealth, everything he's been pretending to have for 10 years. And Conrad poured wine on it, someone said. On his father, Priscilla corrected quietly. He poured wine on his father. The envelope was in Mr. Wendell's jacket pocket. The silence that followed lasted 15 seconds. Burton told me later that every person in that room was staring at the wine-stained envelope, at the ruined documents inside, at the blank signature line that would never be filled. No one said anything. The evidence was sitting right there. The ultimate self-inflicted wound. The inheritance destroyed by the same hand that was supposed to receive it. Burton came back on the line phone off speaker. The meeting is adjourning, he said softly. Thank you for letting me hear that, I said. Wendell, he said, they didn't say a word after she showed them. They just stared. I know, I said, because what else was there to do? My son had been one signature away from owning 40% of a billion-dollar company. One signature away from having everything he'd been claiming to have built. And his own hand, the hand that signed contracts and gave orders and pointed at people he thought were beneath him, that hand poured wine that destroyed it all. They just stared at the wine-soaked envelope in silence. 40%. Hundreds of millions. One signature away. And my son poured wine on it in front of 250 witnesses. But the wine and the envelope are not the worst of it, because the next morning the media is going to find the old photographs. I woke up the next morning to 53 missed calls, and when I finally looked at my phone, the first thing I saw was a photograph of my wife. Her face smiling from 1987, back when we still believed our son would honor what we built. The photograph was everywhere. On news sites, on social media, on corporate blogs and investment forums. The same photograph Simone had deleted from the company website 3 years ago, the one showing Opal at 31 in a hard hat and work boots, standing in front of our first construction site with blueprints in her hand. Burton called me at 7:22. Have you seen it? He asked. I'm looking now, I said. I was sitting at my kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through screen after screen of photographs I hadn't seen in years. Me and Opal in 1987. Me and Opal in 1990. Pictures from job sites, from contract signings, from the early days, when we were just two people with a truck and a dream. Every single photograph Simone had systematically removed from corporate materials. Every image she deleted from the website, scrubbed from promotional materials, excluded from anniversary presentations. The internet found them all. There's documentation too, Burton said. Mortgage records from 1987. Bank statements showing you and Opal mortgaged your first home to meet payroll that winter. Public records. All of it archived. All of it now being shared everywhere. I clicked on another link. A news article with the headline, Viral Wine Video CEO Humiliated Company Founder His Own Father. The article included the clip. The same 37 seconds from the gala. But this time it had context. Photographs of me and Opal building the company. Documents showing our sacrifices. Commentary explaining who the man in the navy blazer actually was. The comments section had exploded. Chakitam, a CEO pours wine over his own biological father. This is beyond corporate drama. This is betrayal. The founder mortgaged his home to pay workers in 1987, and his son erased him from history and poured wine on him in 2024. I hope that old man takes everything from him. I see my wife's face on a screen for the first time in 3 years. Not the photo from her memorial service, but her at 31 smiling in a hard hat, holding blueprints, believing in a future where our son would honor what we built. How many views? I asked Burton. The updated video hit 2 million in the first 3 hours, he said. It's accelerating. Every major news outlet is picking it up. They're calling it the biggest corporate scandal of the year. I set my phone down on the kitchen table, looked out the window at the November morning. Gray sky, bare trees. The world continuing exactly as it had before, except now 2 million people knew what my son had done. There's more, Burton said quietly. Simone. Someone got a photograph of her this morning. She's at their apartment. The photographer caught her through the window. And she looks like she's falling apart, Burton said. Mascara running, sitting alone in front of a laptop, phone on the table beside her buzzing constantly. The caption says she hasn't responded to any messages since the video went viral. I thought about Simone sitting in that apartment, the same apartment the company had provided, the one she'd have to vacate now, watching her carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. Let me know if anything changes, I said. There's a board meeting at 9:30, Burton said. We need to present the email evidence. I'll be there, I said. I arrived at headquarters at 9:15. Burton was already in his office with Priscilla and Leland, 3 folders spread across the desk. These are the emails, Burton said, gesturing to the folders. 3 years of correspondence. Simone to IT to communications to marketing, all directing the systematic removal of your image and opals from company materials. I picked up the first folder, opened it, started reading. Email from Simone to the IT director dated March 2021. Please remove all photographs featuring Wendell Hoffman from the corporate website. Replace with project images only. Complete by end of week. Email from Simone to the communications team dated July 2021. Effective immediately, all company founding history should begin with Conrad's appointment as CEO in 2014. Do not reference prior leadership or founding members in any external materials. Email from Simone to HR dated November 2022. Please instruct all employees to refrain from referring to Wendell Hoffman as the founder in any public or internal documents. Use former leadership if historical reference is necessary, page after page, directive after directive. 3 years of calculated erasure, documented and time-stamped. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the second signature on every email. The approval line at the bottom. The timestamp showing when the directive was reviewed and authorized. Conrad Hoffman, approved. With the date and time, every single one. Or he knew, Leland said quietly. He was standing beside me looking at the same emails. Every directive, every deletion, every rewrite, he approved all of it. How long does it take to erase a father from history? 3 years of emails, hundreds of directives, thousands of deleted photographs, all approved by a son who signed his name to every single directive. Both are liable under the moral conduct clause of the trust, Burton said. He was looking at me, waiting for confirmation. I closed the folder, set it back on the desk. Yes, I said. Both of them. The clause allows for immediate disinheritance in cases of moral turpitude or conduct contrary to family values. Burton continued. This qualifies: systematic betrayal, public humiliation, intentional erasure of family legacy. The documentation is irrefutable. Priscilla spoke for the first time. Wendell, she said softly. We need your formal authorization to proceed. Once we invoke the clause, there's no going back. Conrad loses any claim to future inheritance. Simone loses any benefits as family. I looked at the 3 folders on the desk. 3 years of evidence. 3 years of my son choosing to erase me, choosing to humiliate me, choosing to betray everything his mother and I had built. What is it? I bet him. Burton made a note in his legal pad. I'll draft the formal notice this afternoon. Why, there's one more thing, Leland said. We're hearing that Conrad and Simone have started pointing fingers at each other. Simone's claiming she was following Conrad's orders. Conrad's saying Simone manipulated him into approving things he didn't fully understand. They're hiring separate lawyers, Priscilla added. As of this morning. My son's signature appeared on every single directive. He cannot say he didn't know. He knew. He chose. But he does not know yet that they have started turning on each other, because by noon, Simone and Conrad will each have hired separate lawyers. By noon, my son and his wife had each hired separate lawyers, and by 2 o'clock, they were screaming at each other in a conference room with the door closed, but not closed enough to keep the receptionist from hearing every word. Burton called me at 11:45 to tell me Simone had retained Kenneth Drake, a personal attorney, specializing in high-stakes divorce and liability defense. Drake took her as a client at 11:30, without realizing he was about to witness a marriage implode in his conference room 3 hours later. She's claiming she was following Conrad's orders, Burton said, trying to establish that she had no independent authority to make those decisions. And Conrad, I asked. He found out about her meeting with Drake at 12:30. Hired his own attorney within the hour. Victoria Hayes, corporate defense, 20 years of experience. She agreed to represent him at 1 o'clock, knowing the case was already lost, but unable to turn down the retainer fee. I was sitting in my living room, same chair I'd sat in the night before when the board voted. The afternoon light coming through the windows felt different now. Sharper, clearer. They're meeting at 2. Burton continued. Drake's office, Simone requested it, said they needed to coordinate their legal strategy. But they won't coordinate, I said. No, Burton agreed. They won't. He called me back at 2:43. The receptionist heard everything he said. The conference room walls are glass. Sound carries. Simone was screaming that Conrad approved everything, that every single directive has his signature. Conrad was yelling that Simone orchestrated the entire erasure, that she gave the orders, and he just trusted her judgment. This is what it looks like when two people who destroyed a father together turn around and destroy each other, separate lawyers by noon, screaming match by 2 p.m., media leak by 3 p.m. The receptionist told a friend, Burton said. The friend works for the Tribune. By 3 o'clock, the headline was already online, CEO and wife turn on each other in legal battle. I did nothing to cause them to turn on each other. I didn't have to. They destroyed themselves the moment they realized there was no way out except to blame the other person. There's something else, Burton said. His voice changed, got quieter. I need to show you something. Can you come to the office at 4? What is it? The trust documents, he said. The original ones from 2001. There's a clause I need to read to you. In person. I arrived at headquarters at 3:50. Burton's office was on the 8th floor corner suite with windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. He was sitting at his desk with a folder open in front of him. Sit, he said. I sat. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a document I recognized, the Wendell Hoffman Family Trust, established in 2001. My signature at the bottom. And beside it, opals. Page 7, Burton said. The Moral Conduct Clause. I turned to page 7. The heading read, Provisions for Forfeiture of Inheritance Rights. Below it, 3 numbered paragraphs. Read the first one, Burton said. I read, Intentional public humiliation of the founder in any professional or social setting, as witnessed by third parties. My chest tightened. The second one, Burton said. I read, Falsification of company history, or systematic erasure of the founder's contributions to the enterprise for purposes of personal aggrandizement. I couldn't breathe. The third, Burton said quietly. I read, actions that endanger the reputation or financial standing of the enterprise for purposes of personal vanity or gain. I looked up at Burton. He was watching me with the expression of someone delivering news he'd been carrying for a long time. All 3 violations have occurred and are fully documented, Burton said. The wine incident, the photograph erasure, the diverted funds for stock buybacks, every single one. I looked back down at the document. At the signatures at the bottom of page 7, mine and Opal's. Hi, she wrote this, Burton said. The clause. Opal drafted it. You signed the trust, but she was the one who insisted on these specific provisions. I was there in the room when she dictated them to the attorney. I hold the phone and listen to Burton read Opal's words from 23 years ago, words about protecting the founder from intentional humiliation, and I realize she knew our son better than I ever did. She told me something that day. Burton continued. After you left the attorney's office, she said, Burton, if Conrad ever becomes the kind of man who would betray his father, Wendell won't see it coming. He loves too much. He'll make excuses. He'll wait too long. So I'm putting this in the trust, and I'm not telling him it's there because if the day comes when it's needed, he won't be able to pull the trigger himself. You'll have to do it for him. I closed my eyes. No, she knew, I said. Yes, Burton said. 23 years ago, she knew that a day like this might come. I opened my eyes and looked at Opal's signature. Her handwriting. The same hand that had held mine on construction sites, that had signed loan documents beside me, that had built this company with me from nothing. The clause is automatic, Burton said. Once all 3 violations are documented, forfeiture is immediate. Conrad loses all inheritance rights. Simone loses all family benefits. They have no legal recourse. Opal made sure of that. I traced my finger over her signature, felt the slight indentation in the paper where she'd pressed the pen. When do we invoke it? I asked. It's already invoked, Burton said. The moment the 3rd violation occurred. I'm filing formal notice tomorrow morning, but there's one more thing. He pulled another document from the folder, placed it in front of me. The trust requires appointment of an interim executive chairman in the event of CEO suspension. The only person authorized under the trust provisions is you. The board voted this afternoon. Unanimous. You're being asked to return to the company. Not permanently, just until we can stabilize and appoint new leadership. I looked at the appointment letter. My name at the top. Interim executive chairman. Effective immediately. Tomorrow, Burton said. They want you to start tomorrow. My wife knew. 23 years ago, she knew that a day like this might come. She prepared for me without ever telling me. And now the 3 violations she wrote about in 2001 have all occurred, which means the clause is about to be invoked. Because tomorrow I am going back to the company as interim executive chairman. I walked into Hoffman Infrastructure Group headquarters at 7:15 Monday morning, not through the executive entrance Conrad had built, but through the main lobby where our foremen and estimators came in every day. The security guard looked up from his desk, recognition flickering across his face, then something that might have been relief. Mr. Hoffman, he said quietly. Welcome back. Thank you, I said. 4 days since the gala. 4 days since my son poured wine over my head. 4 days since the board voted to suspend him, and I was walking back into the company I'd built 37 years ago, not as founder emeritus, not as retired leadership, but as interim executive chairman with the authority to make every decision my son used to make. Burton was waiting for me in the main conference room on the 3rd floor. Priscilla was there too, along with 3 senior foremen, Frank Kozlowski, Miguel Santos, Robert Sullivan, men who'd been with us for 15, 20, 25 years. The men who actually built the buildings we sold. I walked in and sat down at the head of the table, the same table where Conrad used to sit. The chair was still warm from whoever had been using it last. Before we discuss anything else, I said, are our workers all right? Are the projects running? The room went quiet. Priscilla looked at Burton. Burton looked at me. Mr. Hoffman, Priscilla said carefully. 3 projects were halted last month. Conrad used operational funds for stock buybacks to inflate the share price before the gala. When the bank withdrew support after the personal guarantee was revoked, the partners suspended work pending new financial assurances. How many workers affected? I asked. To 240, Frank Kozlowski said. His voice was rough from 30 years on construction sites. They're still on payroll, but they're sitting idle. No work means no purpose. Some are already looking elsewhere. I could have started with Conrad. I could have made my return about what he'd done to me at that gala, what he'd taken from my reputation. But 25 years ago, I'd made a promise to every person who worked for this company. I would never put my pride before their paychecks. And I wasn't about to start now. How much to restart them? I asked. Priscilla pulled out a folder, opened it. 180 million. Personal guarantee backed by the trust. The partners are ready to resume immediately if you sign. Draft the guarantee, I said. I'll sign it today. Burton leaned forward. Wendell, that's a significant personal liability. If the projects fail, they won't fail, I said. We've been building infrastructure for 37 years. We know how to do this. Draft the guarantee. Get the partners their assurance. Put our people back to work. Priscilla made a note. I'll have it ready by noon. And the workers? Miguel Santos asked. When do we tell them? Tell them now, I said. Call the foreman. Get everyone back on site tomorrow morning. We have buildings to finish. The 3 foremen stood and left the room. Burton and Priscilla stayed. There's one more thing, Burton said quietly. Conrad's termination decree. It needs to be delivered today. Formal notice. Legal requirement. You'll do it? I asked. Yes, he said. This afternoon. Burton told me later what happened when he delivered the decree. He arrived at the corporate apartment at Trump International Hotel and Tower at 3:30. Conrad answered the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants. No suit. No tie. No polished executive armor. Burton handed him the envelope. This is formal notification of employment termination and asset forfeiture under the terms of the Wendell Hoffman Family Trust. Conrad took the envelope, opened it, started reading. Effective immediately, he read aloud. His voice was flat, empty. Termination of employment as Chief Executive Officer. Revocation of compensation package including base salary of $2.8 million annually. Vacation of company housing within 30 days. Return of company vehicle. Cancellation of corporate credit accounts and club memberships. He looked up at Burton. The apartment. Company property, Burton said. You have 30 days. The car. She's company property. It will be retrieved tomorrow. Conrad stood there in the doorway holding the decree, and Burton said he looked like a man who was reading his own death certificate. Simone appeared behind him. What's going on? Conrad handed her the decree without speaking. She read it quickly. Her face went pale. What does this mean? The apartment. The car. It means it was never ours, Conrad said. His voice was quiet now. None of it was ever ours. Your father is doing this? Simone's voice was rising. No, Conrad said. I did this. I poured the wine. I just didn't know what I was holding. Burton told me Conrad stood in that apartment for 11 minutes After Simone left the room, just stood there holding the termination decree, looking at the floor-to-ceiling windows that showed him a city he thought he owned. The concierge mentioned later that when Conrad finally moved, he walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the glass like a child. By 4 o'clock, Simone had called movers. By 5, she was packing suitcases. By 6, the building's concierge told Burton they'd requested storage for their belongings. They have nowhere to go. Burton told me that evening. We were sitting in his office, paperwork spread across the desk. The personal guarantee I'd signed, the project restart authorizations, the worker recall notices. No family? I asked. Simone's parents are in Florida. They haven't spoken in 5 years. Conrad has... you. I looked out Burton's office window at the Chicago skyline, lights coming on as evening settled over the city. The same city my son thought he owned 4 days ago. He has 30 days, I said. Yes, Burton said. And no personal savings. None, Burton said. We checked. Everything was company provided. The apartment, the car, the credit cards, the club memberships. Even their furniture was leased through company accounts. They own almost nothing personally. I closed my eyes, tried to imagine what it felt like to be 40 years old and discover that everything you thought was yours was actually borrowed. That the life you'd been living was subsidized by the father you'd humiliated. What will they do? I asked. Burton was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know, but I suspect they'll come to you. I opened my eyes, looked at him. When? I asked. Soon, he said. They have nowhere else to go. The doorbell rang at 7:42 on a Sunday morning. Through the frosted glass, I saw 2 shapes I hadn't expected to see again for the rest of my life. Burton had been right. They came, 17 days after the gala. 13 days after they learned they had to vacate the apartment. And they came here to my modest home in Evanston, the house Opal and I bought when Conrad was 7 years old. I walked to the door slowly, put my hand on the knob, took a breath. Then I opened it. Conrad stood in jeans and a plain navy windbreaker that looked like it came from a clearance rack. Simone stood beside him in leggings and a sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. They looked like normal people, not like the polished, powerful couple who had erased me from company history and poured wine over my head in front of 250 witnesses. Dad, Conrad said. Quiet, uncertain. I said nothing, just looked at them. Simone stepped forward. Wendell, we were wrong. We treated you that way because we didn't know you still held the... She stopped. Realized what she was about to say, but I'd already heard it. Didn't know what I asked? Conrad looked at the ground. She means we didn't know you still had the ownership, the power. Not sorry for the act. Sorry they miscalculated the target. Not apologizing for humiliating a human being, apologizing for humiliating someone who turned out to have the authority to take everything away. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You meant exactly that. Can we come in? Conrad asked us. Please. I looked at my son, at the man I'd raised in this house, taught to throw a baseball in that front yard, helped with homework at the kitchen table visible through the doorway behind me. Know what I said? Simone's voice rose, losing its practiced smoothness. We have nowhere to go. We've been in a motel for 3 days, 2 weeks before we're out of the apartment completely. No money, no jobs, no references. You did this to us. I did nothing to you, I said. You did this to yourselves. Then Conrad did something I hadn't expected. He dropped to his knees. Right there on my porch in front of Simone, in front of any neighbor who might be watching, my 40-year-old son fell to his knees and looked up at me. Please, he said, one more chance. Any position, any salary. I'll apologize publicly. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't leave us with nothing. Stand up, I said. He didn't move. Conrad, stand up. He stayed on his knees, hands open, waiting. I took a breath and asked the question I'd been carrying since Burton told me they were coming. If that night at the gala I had truly been nothing, no company, no shares, no power, just a poor old man working as a server, would you be on this porch right now asking for forgiveness? Silence. The wind picked up. The old pine tree creaked. A neighbor's wind chime rang somewhere down the block, 5 clear notes in the cold December air. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Simone. She looked away. 5 seconds. 10. 15. I knew the answer. He knew I knew. And still he couldn't say it. Your silence is the answer I needed, I said. You can stand up now. He stood slowly, knees marked with dirt from my unwashed porch. Simone was already turning toward the street. Conrad stood looking at me one last moment, his father, the man who had given him everything, and watched him discard it for the feeling of power. Then he turned and walked to a basic rental sedan parked at the curb. Not his Bentley, not even his own car. They got in. The engine started. The car pulled away and disappeared around the corner. They came because I had power. Not because I was their father. Not because they loved me. Because I could still give them something, or take something away. And that knowledge changed everything I thought I understood about being a father. I closed the door while my son was still standing on the porch. Not slammed, not with drama. Just a quiet click of the latch, the kind of sound that ends a conversation permanently. Through the frosted glass, I could see Conrad's silhouette frozen mid-gesture, one hand still raised, like he'd been about to say something that would change everything. He never got the chance. I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself coffee that had gone cold during their visit, and drank it anyway. The house felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or just emptier in a way I could finally accept. Opal's photo sat on the mantel. Not the formal portrait from the lobby, but the candid shot from our 20th anniversary. She was laughing at something I'd said. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, her hand reaching toward the camera, like she was about to push it away. Real. Unposed. Mine. I think I finally understand, I said to her. She didn't answer, but I could imagine what she might have said watching Conrad's silhouette disappear from our porch. Not, I told you so. Opal was never cruel. Maybe just, what took you so long? I'd spent 6 weeks believing the wine-soaked envelope was the worst moment of my life. Sitting here with cold coffee and a closed door between me and my only child, I realized it was actually the beginning of something. My phone buzzed. Burton Castellano. Board meeting tomorrow at 9. You coming? I typed back, I'll be there. Bring the foundation paperwork. 3 dots. Then, you're sure about this? Completely. Opal had always wanted to do more for foster youth. She'd grown up in the system 3 different homes before she aged out at 18. She used to say the hardest part wasn't the instability. It was feeling that nobody invested in your future because you weren't really theirs. And I want to change that, she'd told me one night in the hospital. Not with my name on a building. Real support education funds that follow the kids' mentorship that doesn't end at 18, help for foster parents who actually care. I'd promised I would make it happen. Then she died, and somehow 6 years passed with that promise still unfulfilled. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. The truth was simpler, I'd been waiting for permission. From Conrad, from the board, from some external voice telling me I was allowed to spend my own money on something that mattered. The wine-soaked envelope gave me that permission. I opened Burton's file, Opal Hoffman Foundation Preliminary Structure. $50 million from my personal assets. A board of former foster youth social workers and education specialists. No corporate executives. No family members. Especially no family members. The mission statement read, to invest in the futures of foster youth by providing educational support, mentorship, and transition services that extend beyond the aging out period, demonstrating that every young person deserves someone who believes in their potential. I heard Opal's voice in every word. I clicked approve. Irrevocable. Permanent. A legacy that had nothing to do with Wendell Hoffman, the founder, or the father who got wine poured on him at a gala. Just Opal and the children who needed someone to invest in their futures the way she'd once desperately needed someone to invest in hers. My phone buzzed again. Not Burton. Conrad, Dad, please, can we talk? Really talk? I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to his name, and moved it to a new category I created right then. Former. Not blocked, not deleted, just categorized accurately. I texted Burton. Announce the foundation first thing tomorrow, before anything else on the agenda. His response was immediate. Conrad's going to lose his mind. I know, I typed, but Opal would have loved it, and for the first time in 6 weeks, that felt like enough. The board meeting went exactly as planned. Burton announced the Opal Hoffman Foundation before Conrad could say a word about quarterly projections. I watched my son's face go pale when he heard the $50 million commitment, watched him calculate, watched him realize I'd already moved on. But that wasn't what stayed with me. 2 days later, I walked into Priscilla Redmond's office with a question I couldn't quite explain. The waitress from the gala, I said. The one who gave me the towel after Conrad. Can you find her? Priscilla looked up from her contract review, reading glasses perched on her nose. 12 years as chief legal counsel. Nothing surprised her anymore. Of course, may I ask why? Because she saw a man who needed help, and she helped him, I said. She didn't know who I was. She didn't calculate what it would get her. She just saw someone in pain and acted. I'll have her name by end of day. She called 3 hours later. See Margot Delacroix, 23 years old. Business degree at Chicago State, finishing her final semester. Works 25 hours a week in catering to cover what financial aid doesn't. GPA of 3.8. First-generation college student. I wrote the name down. Margot. It suited her, the quiet girl who'd materialized with a clean towel and a gentle voice while 300 people looked away. There's more, Priscilla continued. Her father is Jean-Paul Delacroix, third-shift welder at our fabrication facility. 26 years with the company. Perfect attendance. Safety awards. I sat back in my chair. His daughter had offered me a towel. She's already on the foundation scholarship list, Priscilla added. Burton flagged her application personally. I know, I said, though I hadn't known until that moment. But I want to offer her something more. Set up a meeting. Conference room, not my office. I don't want her intimidated. When was the last time someone had done something for me without calculating what it would cost or gain them? I couldn't remember. Not in 10 years. Maybe not in 20. Every kindness in my world carried an invoice, except hers. 3 days later, Margot Delacroix sat across from me in conference room C, wearing a pressed white blouse and black slacks. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. I'm the man you gave the towel to, I said. The night my son, when the wine spilled. Her eyes went wide. I just thought you needed help. You were right. And I want to ask you something. Would you like to join our corporate management training program? 5 full seconds of silence. I don't understand, she finally said. I'm just finishing my bachelor's. The program is for MBAs. The program is for people with potential, I said. Your GPA tells me you can learn. Your father's record tells me you understand commitment. But that towel told me something neither of those things could, that you have instinctive compassion. You can't teach that in business school. Why me? She whispered. Because my son had every advantage I said quietly, and he chose to pour wine on his father in front of 300 people. You had nothing to gain and everything to risk offending a guest overstepping your role, and you chose grace. I'm betting on grace. Margot stood and extended her hand. Her grip was firm and steady. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I won't let you down. Standing there, I understood something clearly for the first time. My son had been handed every advantage and spent it on entitlement. This welder's daughter had nothing and instinctively chose kindness. The legacy I'd been searching for had been here all along. I'd simply been looking in the wrong direction. I arrived at headquarters before dawn on December 20th, carrying a framed photograph that had spent 15 years hidden in my hallway closet. The lobby was empty. Marcus Rivera nodded and held the door open. Marble floors caught the silence. The Christmas tree blinked with white lights. The wall where Conrad's portrait had hung for years stood bare. I hung the photograph myself using the same hooks. It was from 1987, Opal and me at our first major construction site. Hard hats, work boots, concrete dust on our faces. We were 31 years old, grinning like we'd won the lottery. The company was 3 months old. We had no idea what was coming. Below the frame, I mounted a small brass plaque and read it aloud to the empty room. A business can be built with money and steel, but only gratitude can keep it alive. Opal and Wendell Hoffman, 1987. Opal had spoken those words the day that photograph was taken. I'd written them down that night because they sounded important, though I didn't fully understand them yet. It took 37 years and a wine-soaked envelope to finally get it. The early morning cleaning crew arrived. A woman paused and looked at the photograph, then at me. "Beautiful couple," she said. "Thank you, that was my wife. She passed 6 years ago." She smiled gently. "I bet she'd be proud of you putting her picture up like this." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I left the building as the sun rose over Chicago. That evening, I sat in my Evanston kitchen, watching the season's first snowfall soft and steady, covering the old pine tree the way forgiveness covers anger if you give it enough time. But forgiveness is not forgetting, and it is not pretending consequences don't matter. The dark roast coffee filled the kitchen with a familiar warmth. For a moment, I could almost believe Opal was about to walk through the door. But she wasn't coming, and Conrad wasn't calling. Somewhere in this city, my son was starting over from absolute zero. Not because I desired vengeance, but because it was the only road left for him to learn what money and titles never could. He'd had every advantage and used it to value power over people, position over principle. 23 years ago, Opal had insisted on adding a clause to our estate documents, a mechanism to remove Conrad from succession if it ever became necessary. At the time, I'd thought it excessive. She'd looked at me steadily and said, "Because love means preparing for the hard choices, not just the easy ones." She'd known. Somehow she'd always known. I didn't know if Conrad would rebuild himself into a good man. I didn't know if he would learn humility, develop real skills, or ever apologize for the right reasons. Those were his questions to answer, not mine. For 10 years, I'd cushioned every fall and excused every failure, telling myself it was love. But real love means knowing when to step back, even when the path ahead is hard and the outcome uncertain. The harshest boundaries are sometimes the deepest form of love. The snow kept falling. My coffee was still warm. And somewhere in this city, my son was learning what it meant to have nothing, which was the only way he'd ever understand what it meant to build something worth keeping. It was no longer my job to carry him. It was my job to let him walk. And to you listening to my story, remember this. The hardest boundaries are sometimes the deepest expressions of love. I spent 40 years being a father, and the last 10 being an enabler. I told myself I was showing unconditional love, but I was really teaching my son that actions don't have consequences. Don't make my mistake. Real family justice isn't about protecting people from the truth. It's about loving them enough to let them face it. You might think Dad's revenge stories are about punishment, but they're really about accountability. When that waitress gave me a towel without knowing who I was, she showed me what my son had lost the ability to see people as people, not positions. I believe God teaches us through the people we meet in our darkest moments. These Dad's revenge stories aren't about destroying someone you love. They're about refusing to destroy yourself by enabling someone who's lost their way. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Do you think I made the right choice, or should family justice look different? Share this with someone who needs to hear that boundaries aren't betrayal. And if you want more stories about standing up with wisdom and grace, please subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story have been adjusted or fictionalized to emphasize the message. What I hope you take away is this: love without boundaries isn't love, it's permission to keep hurting each other.